Hello, and welcome to our weekly dialogue with Helga Zepp-LaRouche, the founder and chairwoman of the Schiller Institute. Today is September 11th, 2024. I'm Harley Schlanger, and I will be your host. You can send your questions for Helga via email to questions@schillerinstitute.org, or you can post them on the chat page. Helga, we have a lot of questions, many of which have to do with the ongoing wars and militarization on the globe. But I'd like to begin with one asking where things stand with building an alternative architecture. Shirley writes, "Thank you, Helga and Harley, for your efforts to revive the anti-colonial program of the non-aligned movement. I grew up in Indonesia, and my family was proud of the role played by our leaders in fighting to end colonial exploitation. The transition to a new system has taken many years, but seems to be back on the agenda, especially with the most recent conferences like that of the Eurasian Economic Forum and the Forum on Africa-China Cooperation. Can you update us on the progress of these two events to replace the system of empire with a fair, peaceful, and prosperous system?"
Well, I think it's on a good way because the situation has changed dramatically from the time when the non-aligned movement started in the 50s and 60s, because at that time, they were all still developing countries, and, the forces trying to prevent that were strong. Now you have practically, because of the rise of China in particular, a very strong economy, which, in terms of many aspects, is already the strongest economy in the world, that there is actually a motor of development. And many developing countries, such as Indonesia, are on a good way. Indonesia will probably bypass Germany as the third largest economy in a very short period of time. And, I think at the recent FOCOC meeting in Beijing, where more than 50 heads of state of the 54 of African nations were present, and many of them had bilateral meetings with President Xi Jinping, I think there was a very clear idea that the future is belonging to the global south, and that many, many development projects will be undertaken. Now, I'm not saying this will be an easy road, because what we see also is that, the battle to try to prevent that, is very hard. You have efforts to destabilize several countries, both for objective reasons, but also, using domestic vulnerabilities. So it's not an easy battle, but I think the overall trend is very, very promising, and I think we will see a major consolidation of the effort to build a new system at the upcoming BRICS meeting in Kazan next month, where several new members probably will join, and several other countries have been invited, special guests. So I think, in general, this is a trend which cannot be reversed unless you have World War III. Then naturally everything stops. But I think if you don't have World War III, which right now is a very, very iffy question, I think that the global south, these are countries who already represent 85% of the world population, about 70% of the GDP. I think that is unstoppable. So with all caution, I'm very optimistic.
Now, we have some questions on the role of the United Nations. We'll start with one from Harry in Colombia, who wrote, "Helga, the citizens of the world are demanding that the rulers stop actions being taken against their citizens. But the UN is an obsolete organization in favor of the highest bidder who finances it. How come the UN did not send the blue helmets as a barrier in Palestine, which could have avoided the current colossal genocide?" And the second question on the UN is a question about asking you if you expect any action to be taken on the call made by the Arab League, the Organization for Islamic Cooperation, and the Non-Aligned Movement, calling on the President of the UN General Assembly to act under the Uniting for Peace framework to address Israel's failure to obey the mandates against genocide by the International Court of Justice. And the person notes that they heard you speak about this motion last week at the IPC call.
Well, I mean, the problem is that, the UN reflects still the post-war situation with the permanent five building, the permanent five in the UN Security Council. And, that is a very difficult question to repair, because you do not want to give up a level of intervention. Obviously, the present permanent five is not representative of the global South. Africa is not represented, Asia, in the form of Russia and China, but not from the standpoint of the developing part of the global South. So that is a difficulty, and I think the reason why the blue helmets were not even considered is because the permanent veto by the United States, sometimes supported by the British, or the British being abstaining, and that is basically what blocked any action, which is exactly why this Uniting for Peace resolution is now being activated, because it is the clause which says that if the UN Security Council is unable, for whatever reason, like a permanent veto of one of the members, to act, then there is the possibility to bring the whole issue to the UN General Assembly. Now that will happen next week, I think on the 17th and 18th, that motion will be discussed. And I can only hope that, that the dynamic will be such, and there is a good chance that it will be, that, that injustice is addressed and remedied, because I think the first day is discussion, and then the second day is supposed to be the decision on some action. Now, I think that underlines the need to have a serious reform of the United Nations. I think the minimum requirement would be, that the global South is represented in proportion to their numbers and significance, which obviously will meet the hard resistance from those people who thought that they were the dominant ones up to now. But I think that is a process which is underway and must be underway. But I think the key problem is that I think that the only way you would get at a real improvement of the United Nations to prevent such, taking advantage of whoever is the biggest money bag, would be to do exactly what I proposed in the 10 principles I suggested for a new security and development architecture, which basically would mean that you have to give the body of law, which is excellent, if you look at the UN Charter, that should not be changed. The whole idea of the 5 principles of peaceful coexistence, this should never be changed. But I think it would require still something which I would call a metaphysical underpinning, something which situates these laws or these principles more in the, I would say, eternal laws of the physical universe. And that obviously is something which needs to be discussed, so that many representatives of the different cultures and civilizations can find a common language, because such principles do exist in every culture and every language. It's just people give it a different name, but they many times mean exactly the same thing, sometimes calling it natural law, like in Europe, or calling it cosmic order, like in India. But I think, that idea that we have to bring into conformity the conditions on Earth with those eternal laws of the universe, I think that is definitely something which would improve the situation of the United Nations tremendously.
Okay, sticking with Gaza, we have this from Patricia in Vancouver, Canada. She said, I watched in rage as Secretary of State Blinken gave a belated pro forma condemnation of the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, after they admitted they killed Aysenur Eigi, a 26-year-old American citizen, during a protest in the West Bank. I was screaming at the television, you heartless bastard, when will you cut off the weapons you are sending which are used to kill in Palestine? And then she asks you, when will Americans wake up to the immorality conducted in their name?
Well, I think there is, definitely motion coming from the young people, the students which are just returning to the campuses. I think I have heard many reports that the issue of the genocide is more hot in the debates than ever before. But I would like to give people in general to consider something, because, the losers are clearly primarily the Palestinian people, who are subjected to this horror show of what is going on in Gaza and increasingly in the West Bank. But there is another loser, and that is the West, or those countries who condone what is going on, pretending to be on the side of Israel, or being, on the side of the government of Israel, which is not identical with Israel as such. And I think that the loss of reputation and loss of sense of integrity is so enormous. A first taste of it you get when you look at the recent press conference between the Jordanian foreign minister and Annalena Baerbock, the German foreign minister. And, she stood there like a little girl being, scolded at school for, having really completely messed up. So what this foreign minister basically said is, you make the mistake of, not making the differentiation between defending the interest of Israel and the interest of this present head of government, and pointing to the loss of, reputation of the West, but also the whole integrity of the system, of the world system is disintegrating as a result of this loss of morality on the side of those who are condoning this. And I don't think that can be repaired quickly. I mean, it would really require a complete 100% turnaround. For example, if the countries of Western Europe or Europe would now say, we regret what we did, we should not have had this happen, and we completely commit now to the reconstruction of not only Palestine, but the whole war-torn region, including Syria, Yemen, Iraq, Afghanistan. And we help to realize the Oasis plan by making investments in infrastructure, irrigation, building cities, building forestry, creating new fresh water with the Oasis plan. And if that would come as a message, let's say, out of the UN General Assembly, I think the world would be willing to forgive. But I don't think the chances that is happening are very high. So I foresee that the West will, if we don't shape up in Europe and in the United States, in the eyes of the world public and of history, we have not done ourselves a favor by letting this, allowing this to happen. But it's still time to change it. That's why we should mobilize for the Oasis plan and a new paradigm, and the idea that the new name of peace is development. That would remedy the situation. If we build now a new world economic order and start to cooperate with the global South in trying to overcome poverty and underdevelopment, that would be the basis, for a redemption of the soul, and also, some order in the world.
You're listening to Helga Zepp-LaRouche. She is the driving force behind the International Peace Coalition, which meets via Zoom every Friday And you can join that if you'd like. You can just look at the schillerinstitute.com to find out how to log on to see that. And there'll be another meeting this Friday at 11 a.m. Eastern. And we can still take some questions from you. Send them to questions@schillerinstitute.org. Now, here's a question from Ali in London, who's very active in the peace movement there, the No to NATO movement. He writes, Blinken is here. Starmer is going to Washington to meet with Biden. I fear they will announce a decision to give Ukraine the go-ahead to use long-range missiles to strike Russia. What do you think they will do?
Exactly what you just said. Everything is primed to do that. Starmer will talk with Biden on Friday, and Blinken will be for several days in London talking to Lemmy, his sidekick, and then they will go together to Kiev and giving Ukraine the permission to use the ATACMS for deep strikes into the territory of Russia. And, this is bringing us step by step closer to World War III. The idea that there are no red lines is foolish. I mean, these people are gambling with the fate of the world because, if you, in a certain sense, I'm surprised how patient Russia has been, but I'm quite afraid that patience is running out. And I think we have to increase the activities of the peace movement. I think that is, on the short term, I think this is an absolute indispensable ingredient because the problem is that we still have a situation where you have a minority in every country of people who are, and I would say, really scared. Because if you think through what is at stake is the existence of everything which we know of, millions of years on Earth, tens of thousands of years of recorded civilization, everything which has been ever produced by a human being in terms of science, technology, culture, art, all of that will vanish. Nobody will have a memory of it. There will be nothing after a nuclear war. So that's what's at stake. And I think, the best, or one of the absolute ingredients is what is necessary. I think we have demonstrations coming on the 21st of September. There's International Peace Day. I think there will be many activities in many countries, help to build them. On the 28th and 29th, there are events in the United States called by Scott Ritter and the Rage Against the War Machine. And then on the 3rd of October, there will be big demonstrations, I hope, in Germany, especially in Berlin. And I think that these must be made manifestations in the same way like the peace movement took to the streets in the beginning of the 80s, where hundreds of thousands and finally 1 million of people were out. And that did create an environment in which the INF Treaty was, maybe not invented and drafted, but it was helped to create that environment. And that's what we need to do more urgently than ever. And then that is not enough. We also have to have a new international security and development architecture, which takes into account the interest of every country on the planet. Because I do not think that if you leave out this country or that country because you have convinced yourself that this is a dictatorship or an autocracy or the bad ones, I don't think it will work. We are sitting in one boat because of nuclear weapons, because of the internet, because of pandemics. I mean, you can drop a pandemic, from in one day by traveling with an airplane, and you can infect almost an entire continent. I mean, we are connected. We are sitting in one boat. And if things go wrong, they go wrong for everybody. And that's why I think we need to have a new design where, you say that the security is indivisible, that the best principles which came out of the Peace of Westphalia was the idea that you have to take into account the interest of the other, or else you create the seed for the next war. So I think we need to have urgently a discussion about what is the security doctrine of every country. Is it in the interest of that country to have such a doctrine, because what has happened now is that far-reaching decisions are being made over the heads of the people who don't even know what is going on, like the deployment, the decision of Biden, the US government, whoever that is at this point, to put long-range missiles into Germany, which then Scholz, sheepishly said, "Oh, the United States made the decision, and that's a good decision." I mean, this guy is really, I don't want to go into lengthy descriptions what I think, but you can imagine what it is. I mean, we have to have a participation of the people in such decisions. The legitimacy of government comes from the consent of the governed. That is one of the principles which should be normal. This was invented by or discovered by Nicolaus of Cues in the 15th century, and it went into the very idea of constitutions, of legitimacy of government. And right now, we are very, very far from that, which expresses itself, that people just do not vote for these governments anymore. And now Scholz has discovered that he wants to have peace all of a sudden because he lost the SPD just lost 2 elections in East Germany. One can only hope that that recognition stays a little bit longer than until the next election, which I think is in a week or so.
Now, on European relations with the United States, we have a question from Professor Larafi, I believe his name is, Larafi. He asks, do you think decoupling the relationship between the US and NATO could contribute positively to a change in the European security architecture and consequently to an improvement of the ties between Russia and the European Union? And I think this is partly reflecting the discussion of Trump-proofing NATO out of fear that Trump will withhold funds from NATO if he's elected. But it has to do with the whole question of Europe and Russia. Would a decoupling with the US make a difference?
Well, right now there is a huge push, by everybody to make Europe Trump-proof, because if Trump wins the election, it is expected that he will demand more payments by the Europeans for their own defense, possibly, not back NATO the same way. But the problem is, I'm all for more sovereignty to the nation states of Europe, and together they can work as a unity, like de Gaulle, suggested the idea of a alliance of sovereign fatherlands. You don't need a supranational structure like the EU Commission for that. But it would require a complete change in the attitude. I mean, that change is, visible among some forces in Europe. I would say, Viktor Orban has proven that, even a small country can act sovereign. When he took over the EU presidency, he immediately went to Kiev, to Moscow, to Beijing, to Washington, to Mar-a-Lago, proposing a different approach to the Ukraine crisis. This was completely rejected by the EU Commission. They haven't recovered from that until the present day. So it would require a different thinking. If you have right now, basically, there's a huge debate that Wagenknecht in a recent TV talk show called Scholz Vassal Chancellor. If my pronunciation is wrong, Hardy, you should correct me, but a Vassal Chancellor. And there's a huge debate. Can you use such a word for Chancellor Scholz? Now, all of European nations, with few exceptions, are behaving like complete vassals to the United States and the British. So, that has to be broken. And I think if European nations would take an independent approach and say, we want to have cooperation with the BRICS, with the Global South, with Russia, with China, with the other countries of the Global South, I think that would probably be a healthy shock for the United States. I think on the other side, just the idea to, go in an independent direction without trying to get the United States on board, I'm not sure that that would solve the problem, because, if the world separates into two blocks, it still has the absolute danger, that this could go awfully wrong. And, you have to break this present determination, to keep the hegemon of the West, of NATO, of the United States, the British, which no longer exists in reality. But I think we are in the most dangerous moment, because, if we do not find a peaceful approach, like a conscious decision to stop confrontation and go in the direction of cooperation, I think we are, in danger of losing the entire civilization. That's why I'm pushing this idea of a security architecture which takes the interest of every nation into account. And that obviously includes every nation. It includes Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, the United States, and many other nations as well. I think that requires a difference in approach, but I'm of the deepest conviction that you don't solve that problem, it will not go out peacefully.
Now we have a question from Hendrik on Germany. He said, in listening to you talk about the terrible coalition government in Germany, I agree with you that it's the worst government in the post-war years. But I would like to know what you think should be done. Is there a provision for early elections, a no confidence vote, or do we have to stick it out until the next scheduled national election in September 2025?
Well, let's see what happens with the upcoming Brandenburg election, which I think, if these people would be concerned about the well-being of the country, they would have resigned already. They get one rejection by the voters after the other. The coalition government has less than, I think, 30% at this point. And, they are the most unpopular, disliked, rejected government I think the German Federal Republic ever had since World War II. I think that they are trying to stay in there no matter what. Right now, for example, they had a summit on migration, the coalition government and the CDU, CSU opposition. And it cracked, it completely detonated because they couldn't find an agreement. None, zero. On the budget for next year, they don't find an agreement. This is unmanageable. It's very difficult to say. I think they will avoid a mistrust vote, a vote of non-confidence, because they like their position and the privileges which go along with that much better than anything else. And therefore, I think they will try to stick to it until the bitter end, whatever happens strategically in the meantime. I think the only thing one can do under these circumstances is we have to organize the population, that they start to take responsibility for what happens to Germany. I mean, Germany right now, it's a horror show. The economy is in a free fall. Now, finally, after a long time, even the industry associations start to warn, basically, that is happening. But they're not suggesting a change, because they're not suggesting a break of the Green Deal. They're still talking about the transition into the green economy, which is one of the major reasons why, we are about to lose Germany in so many ways. And look at what happens in the health sector. The incredible cutting down of Lauterbach has just proposed a reform, which would shut down even more. Many small hospitals all over the countryside have disappeared already. The supply of people in certain areas is no longer secure. You have to wait 8-9 months to have a specialist, even if you have acute problems. the German health system is falling out. The bottom is falling out. And I can only imagine, what happens if this gets worse. I think, the worst kind of thing could repeat itself in Germany in terms of, violence. It's already, pretty bad, but the way the government is trying to orchestrate it is to blame it on all things except of their wrong policies. So I think the only remedy is educate citizens, look at what we do, the Schiller Institute and our international movement, the IPC. There are other forces in Germany who are waking up. But I think we have to unite because I can only say the crisis is reaching a boiling point, and we don't have enough citizens who have the courage under these circumstances or the commitment to qualify themselves to have a better solution than the present government. So I can only ask you, join with us and let's try the best we can do.
And here's a final question for you from a longtime supporter who said that he was very appreciative of the commemoration the other day of the 102nd birthday of Lyndon LaRouche. And he said in that context, he'd like to bring up a proposal. He said it was 23 years ago today, that is September 11th, 2001, that the operation to move ahead the national security state was furthered by the attack on New York City and Washington by so-called terrorists. And he said that Lyndon LaRouche made a forecast in January of that year that there would be a Reichstag fire event that would give the neocons the justification to move ahead with a national security state for data collection, surveillance, censorship, and so on. He said, now we see this attack on the First Amendment is regaining speed to the point of threatening the constitutional protections of free speech. And he said, could you publish a pamphlet on LaRouche's warning in January 2001 of the Reichstag fire threat and trace the consolidation of a fascist state from then to the present to give people an ability to fight back?
Well, thank you for this proposal. I think this is an excellent one. That makes me very happy because you just responded to what I just said before, that we need citizens to take responsibility for the state of affairs. And what you just proposed, I think, is an excellent example of exactly that. And I will still today discuss this with my colleagues because it's absolutely on the mark. Because, when my late husband, Lyndon LaRouche, made this video, and you can look at it in the internet on, I think it was the 3rd of January of 2001, he said, this was 3 weeks before the Bush administration came into office. And he said, this administration will face such enormous financial difficulties of the financial system, which they are unprepared to deal with. And therefore, they will tend to go for a pretext with a new Reichstagsfire, in order to implement then exactly what the Reichstagsfire did in the first place, namely to go to fascist policies. And, that is what happened exactly 9 months later on September 11. And, part of this documentation, what you are referring to, is that by pure accident, he was giving a live interview to radio in what was it, in Harley, help me.
Salt Lake City, Utah.
Salt Lake City, yes, exactly, in Utah. And he had no other information. He just thought about it and said, this could not have, this was when at the hour around 9 o'clock when the first planes hit the World Trade Center. And he said, this can only have been done with cooperation of corrupt forces of the US security apparatus. And, because he had knowledge about, what the flight conditions are, the security in the flight conditions. So that is exactly what, is still the question. And, the reconstruction, there was an effort by the commission, the 9/11 commission, but that was suppressed. I think it would be very useful because, under the pretext of terrorist threats, the war on terror, I mean, the entire interventionist wars, starting with Afghanistan and Iraq and Libya, all of that was the result of it. And we got to the present calamity. Exactly, that was in a certain sense, you can say, the Maidan coup for the United States. So I definitely will propose to my colleagues what you just said.
Okay, so we've come to the end of the questions. Helga, can you give us a quick preview of what will be discussed at the International Peace Coalition meeting Friday?
Yes, I would ask people to look at the proceedings of the last IPC meeting from last Friday, which was an absolute breakthrough. We had extraordinary patriots from several countries, but especially also from the United States, Ambassador Jack Matlock, Ted Postol, Colonel Wilkerson. Then we had a German, very important professor, Schreiber. We had Bossart, Colonel Bossart from Switzerland, Ramotar, president from Guyana. And that discussion already, I think, is an absolute must lecture for anybody who wants to find out why we are in such a dangerous situation. Because what Ambassador Matlock contributed was, the promises which were given to Gorbachev in 1990, and he is an authority. He was a time witness, and what he says is in sharp contradiction to lots of the narrative which are being put out today. Then naturally, Professor Postol, leading nuclear expert, he went into horrifying detail of why this present situation with nuclear weapons is so dangerous, and many other extremely important contributions. So please look at that. I think there is even a short version of it now as a teaser, so that you can get a sense of what you can expect. And we have a separate interview of Ambassador Matlock, which he gave to the Schiller Institute and EIR, which you also find on the Schiller side, which is an absolute must lecture about the history of the last 30 years. And it's causing quite some turmoil. It has been republished or referred to in interviews and articles about it several times. So we will have a continuation of that discussion. I think Professor Postol is one of the speakers again, because people have to wake up what is the danger we are in. So please help us to unify the peace movement internationally, because I think only if we unite will we be hopefully strong enough to make our voice heard.
Well, Helga, thank you for joining us again today, and we'll see you on Friday morning.
Yes, till Friday.